Morning, everyone. Appreciate everybody joining. We'll give a couple minutes, just making sure everybody. Okay. You ready to do this thing, Nick, or what?
Oh, yes, sir.
So again, good morning, everybody. Appreciate you taking some time out of your busy days to join us today. Introduce myself real quick. My name's Bergeron, Vice President at In-Telecom. Our co-host today, got Nicolas Tessitore, Solutions Engineer with In-Telecom. Want to say hello, Nick?
Hey, everybody. I'm a solutions engineer over at In-Telecom, and I've been working in Microsoft for about the last 9 years. So I'm excited to show off some AI capabilities and our Copilot agents for you today.
So, look, when we were thinking about doing this thing, it was funny as Nick and I kind of worked through the process. We were like, let's just leverage AI for the whole thing, right? And I think over the last year, we've really watched AI move from being something organizations were experimenting with to something they're actively trying to operationalize. So I don't think the question is whether we should use AI. It's really how do we actually put AI to work inside our business. So I'm excited to get into that a little bit. And I hope today what we'll do is educate and help people understand what an AI agent actually is. I think people think of AI, especially as they're just getting started, as another chatbot, right? Like whether it was their experience with ChatGPT or some of their baseline experiences with Copilot. But today we're going to actually talk about and go through the process of building an agent in Copilot, right? And really how to operationalize those things. So I hope everybody by the end of this has a better understanding of where to start. So, and I think whether you're in operations, sales, marketing, finance, HR, look, let's all lean in today and just see if we can co-collab on this thing. So,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the purpose of artificial intelligence in the workforce, whether it's just generalized AI, or if it's AI agents in general. So from a leader's perspective, Ben, I'd love to start off and see, what do you think the biggest misconception that business leaders have about AI and their agents?
yeah, I think the biggest misconception that I'm seeing is I wanted to do this, right? But it can only do this, right? And we're operating with, okay, I tried this and my output isn't exactly what I'm looking for, so I move on to the next thing. And I think what I hope we can achieve today is kind of leaning into some of the different things that we can build and set up agents to actually get the output that we're looking for the first time. Well, maybe not the first time, right? But maybe the second or third time. So like we have to train these things and we have to build them in a way where they get us the result that we're looking
Yeah, definitely. As we go through some of the Copilot stuff, I think that's going to be a big area we're going to learn from, is that there's a lot of training that goes into this. I've been using my Copilot for, I think, the last 9 months straight of being here at Intellicom, and mine's really well trained up. And a lot of people don't have their just general Copilot trained yet to actually start working for them. So I think that's where agents become a lot more powerful, is having something that's in general pre-trained for you so you can ask simpler questions and get the results. But you're right, it's never the first time around. You generally ask quite a few times. We'll see that in the demo today, I'm sure.
Yeah. I got a quick question for you. So I kind of want to delineate the difference between automation tools and AI agents, because I think that that's some common misconceptions as well. So would you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of businesses struggle. There's been times we've actually identified that a business automation tool like a Power Automate or a Zapier is more useful than artificial intelligence. And that just comes down to the work that's actually being executed. Now, it's not to say that, an agent, whether built from Copilot or Copilot Studio, can't do automation and workflows. But for example, maybe you're just moving data between two different data sources. That's generally just an automation that you're going to put together, and it's going to run autonomously in the background. Where agents are a lot more useful is it's almost kind of like building out an employee for a specific use case that's going to get the job done one way. And you can tie automations into that where you prompt the agent and you say, hey, I need this thing to be executed, like put together my mailbox and put certain subject lines into explicit folders and create the folders for me. That's an example of an automation. Whereas I might sit down with my agent and say, hey, I want to analyze all the deals in my pipeline, and then I want to break them down by risk. An automation is not going to go through and look at your deal notes, the customer size, and all of those items that you might classify. An automation is just going to be a very simple workflow, moving things from point A to point B or creating things for you. I think that's generally where a lot of businesses fall down is they first go to, oh, we just need AI. And then AI doesn't perform that the right way.
I think you struck a chord with me there, right? Like you definitely want to talk about the things that I want to talk about, which is revenue, right? So, and look, today those are some of the data sets that we'll use, right? But those are pretty applicable to whatever work center that you're in, right? But we do need to build it a certain way. And I definitely don't want to bypass this portion of today without talking about a little bit of the compliance or security aspect and what companies should consider when it comes to security or sensitive data when you're starting to do these things. So I'd love if you could elaborate on some of those things and even specifically why we want to talk about the Microsoft ecosystem.
Yeah, that's by far the biggest pitfall of artificial intelligence right now. You'll see that in a lot of organizations, the term is shadow AI, and I think businesses are becoming a lot more familiar with shadow AI. And what that means is that the organization doesn't quite have a grasp on all of the tools or the large language models that are being brought into their ecosystem. So a good example right now is actually Claude. Claude is one of, if not the most powerful AI tools out there, and it's because of its primary focus. You're not going to get image generation from Claude. You're not going to get the most creative in terms of what ChatGPT can put out there, but you're always getting really pertinent answers to what you're asking. If you're doing coding, like building out websites with HTML or PowerShell and scripting, that's because of the model that's in Claude. When you look at the other tools, ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, Copilot, the biggest factor is security. And what businesses are now looking into is that your data that you put into these models is training other people's models. So with Copilot, the primary difference is that one, it's locked into your ecosystem. So there's something called a semantic model, and it's stored in Azure. It's a database that you'll never see, you'll never have to touch, but your data you input into Copilot never leaves your environment. It's actually why a lot of businesses think Copilot is dumber than the other models, because you have to train your model as well as the other people in your organization have to train it. So the more you use Copilot, the smarter it gets, the more it learns about you, and it does something inherently different than all the other models. It operates off of role-based access control. So companies will come to us and they'll say, hey, we're ready for AI. We want to buy it today. We want to roll it out. We put in an AI assessment and we look over things like their general permissions, what their compliance needs to be for the organization to function, and you find gaps. Maybe a field service worker has general access to accounting, finance, HR, and nobody knew. And if we were to install, well, even if it was just Copilot, they'd be able to surface that information. And I think the most common point is, hey, tell me about my boss's payroll today. And Copilot can find that info. Where that becomes really scary for organizations is when you implement third-party AI. Let's say I connected Claude today and we had no role-based access control. Not only is Claude going to give the field service worker my boss's payroll info, my boss's payroll info is also going to go out to everybody else in the world. And if they say, hey, tell me how much money Ben makes today, everybody's going to know. And that's a huge security risk when we start to consider that, globally, HR is becoming regulated with artificial intelligence to the point HR might not even be able to use it. So when we look at those security barriers, if they're not in place, you're going to have a lot more risks in terms of general data breach and general data leakage into even your own employees.
Now, look, I think you hit a ton of good points there, right? And I think even just talking about like the internal policies that you need to have in place, and you're just sharing some insights on internal information. Imagine customer data, right, or client data, or in healthcare organizations. What it's so important to make sure the team understands what the policy is, that you have the right guardrails in place, and that you're actively monitoring. So definitely wanted to touch on some of those things, as we start to get into this today.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Something else you want to share there?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you from the revenue side, because you get to see a lot more of the customers coming in or that the prospects we're touching base with. Which industries do you think are tending to adopt AI the most right now?
Yeah, look, I think manufacturing and distribution is definitely going after it fast right now. I think the government side wants to, but they don't know really how to do some of these things right now. So like, I think you're seeing some state and local municipalities that are a little hesitant on some of these things right now, rightfully so. But also I'm seeing some things in the healthcare industry. So, and I think today the purpose is like, let's just all pretend we're just getting started, right? Because we're all novices, right? It's all moving so fast that, tomorrow there'll be something new that we have to learn and we have to work on together. So like, where should people begin?
Absolutely. Let me share my screen and we'll kick it off. So today we're going to go through a couple of things prior to getting to the actual agent creation, because I want everybody to see really the purpose of why you would create an agent in the first place, and also understand the capabilities of just general Copilot. Funny enough, as Ben was talking about earlier, we sat down, we're thinking to ourselves, what would be useful for executives to see in a webinar about an agent? What are going to be the top use cases and what will help them right away? So I'm going to pull up our Copilot window here over on my other screen, and I'm going to briefly just take you through what we use to formulate today's webinar and get an idea of how we created the content. I'm also going to go through the data files that we've created using Copilot, so you kind of get a brief understanding of, how to make a content library that your agent can work off of and start to base the revenue decisions off of. Now, we'll also go through general prompting. You'll see here that I asked a very, very basic question. I use Copilot so much that this generalized prompt knows what I'm going to be looking for. But in most instances, when you give Copilot chat something, just a simple one-liner, it might have trouble finding out what you're talking about. So when I asked, what are some of the top ways executives utilize AI for their businesses? First of all, it went across our environment. What files do I have access to? And this kind of plays into that security issue if you have those. And it said, okay, well, we talk about the intelligence platform. We have meeting summaries about sales enablement. We have an AI call intelligence flyer. So it wanted to base some of the decisions off of that. And the first one that came up was driving revenue growth, something that is not necessarily easy when you're stuck in Excel files all day. You're jumping from your CRM to your quoting tool back into your revenue files and trying to figure out and put all this data together. Now, it came up with a couple of other ideas like automating core business workflows, enhancing the customer experience. And as you can see, it's giving me the source that it's saying, hey, I think this might be something useful. It's what your organization talks about or what you're talking about with your customers. This one right here actually highlights something we've already done. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see one of the agents that I've built that we've been using internally, which is our scope of work agent. It's something that we put together in Copilot Studio, so it's a little bit more advanced. And we'll talk about the difference between the agent we're creating today and Copilot Studio when we get there. But we have actually been using agents internally to not only speed up what our customer success team is doing, as well as our solutions engineering team, but in general, create a template. So nobody's creating different scopes of works, everything's standardized to what the business function is.
But I think
Now,
before you go any further, real quick, Nick, I wanted
Yeah.
to chime in a little bit. Like when you were talking about that first thing, right? Your first bullet here, that when we were looking at it and talking through it, and like what executives are doing or driving growth. And I think about even what my day looks like, right? And driving revenue for the organization. And you mentioned like going into this CRM, looking at these Excel, and you're trying to make sense of data, right? And I think data, when you're problem solving, you're trying to find out when, where, and why, right? And so you can go take action. If you're trying to take action. And I think data tells you the when and the where, but it doesn't tell you the why. And when I look at how we're using these agents today, these agents are helping us determine why without having to go find the when and where, right? So I'm getting to skip those other things so I get to action so much faster.
Absolutely. I can think about, the systems we use internally, they're very helpful for the business function we have, but it takes a lot of time to sit down, hop into Salesforce, really understand the deal, potentially meet with the employee and say, hey, what happened on these meetings? What's going on? Hop back into your other data and say, okay, well, why is the revenue different? Why are these numbers looking this way? When AI, whether it's connected or you're just giving it data, can do it right away. We'll see that with the agent today and the Excel files we've created. It's significantly faster. And when you have the notes, you have it understanding sentiment behind the notes and the information, you can fly. You just throw those wings on. So we're going to scroll past some of this because, as you can see, it gets into even more topics and how this is important for me. So I then decided I want option one. I want an hour-long webinar, and I want it to talk about revenue growth. Now I'm going to skip past this because it gives us some ideas that were really strong, and it talks about building out the actual agent for me. Funny enough, today's agent was built by Copilot, which in
I
retrospect
think
is
that's a good
actually,
point, though, right? It
yeah.
is like we might not already know that knowledge today of like how to build the agent, and that's why we're doing these things. But I love the fact that we can use the system to teach ourselves as well.
Yeah, it's honestly the best way to do it because when you're sitting there learning, you can think about any tool you're learning as a professional and you're trying to figure out, you're trying to troubleshoot, but we have a system that we're going to build an agent off of and it knows how to build itself, which is a really interesting thing to even say. That but that's the reason we even asked Copilot was, what's the best way to formulate this? So it builds out our call structure, what we could talk about, how we can build it. And we came to the conclusion that some of this stuff in it was going to be related to call structure. So talking about, how the CSMs have their calls, their transcripts and stuff. And we really wanted this revenue agent to be about growth, finding your deals. Are they at risk? Are they stalled? What do these deals mean to the organization? So we had reprompted it, said avoid anything call related and recreate the idea. And it starts putting everything back together for me. And you can see it's very well structured. And it started to actually demo data for me. So you'll see it's tabularized here. I can copy it and bring it to Excel. But when it got to a point that we were comfortable with, we then said, okay, I like the data. Let's create the data. And I think that's going to be the next big thing we talk about here is the fact that General Copilot, and you can enable this in your agents, is able to create anything in Microsoft from Word documents, PowerPoints, Excels, all the way to complex workflow automations. It can build you an entire Power Automate, Power App, and more. It's incredible what this tool can do just from talking to it. So we'll scroll down and I want to get to some of the outputs it gave us so you can see our decision making. So I said, all right, I like this. I need to pitch this idea to Ben first. So, this was a couple months ago and we're talking about actually putting the webinar together. Give me an executive summary of what this is actually going to look like. I don't need all the fluff. Gives me immediately AI revenue webinar brief. I sent this over to Ben. We went back and forth on it to confirm all the details. Boom. We're ready for the webinar. Let's get it scheduled. So now I wanted to talk to it about the best way to make our content work with the agent. This was key to figuring out what is perfect for the agent to be able to look at, read through, and understand every time somebody prompts it a question. This is formulating the best way for the agent to work with the end user without them needing a ton of labor. Normally, if I was to just ask Copilot Chat, look at this Excel of my pipeline and tell me which deals are at risk, it's going to make a whole lot of assumptions unless I give it the criteria in my prompt. These are my risks. These are my problems. This is what's good and what's bad. So this is the whole purpose of an agent is as an organization, we can make those decisions. We can put those KPIs and all of that information into a database and then ground the agent in that database. And we'll talk about grounding soon. So we decided for today's demo, we're actually going to use OneDrive. And I'll pull my file explorer over here. You'll see there's plenty of other files, but we have the executive AI webinar. And these are all of the Excel files, as well as a Word document it's created for me in a single storage. So this is going to be what we could consider our deal library. Now I could have more folders in here if I wanted to. For example, I could have our rules and our analysis files in one folder, and then I could have our deals and our pipeline in another folder. But for today, we kept it simple just to display it to you.
Yeah, and I think about where that data would normally come from, right? Obviously, we want to use test data for this, or and not any real information, but that data would be coming from your CRM, right? Typically, right? Or that data may be coming from your financial tool, whatever that export is going to look like. But I think the root here, what we're going to get into, is it doesn't necessarily matter where the data comes from as much as it matters how we build the agent and how we ground the agent, right? To where when we're starting to do this over and over and over again, it's taking all of that knowledge base internally that we have, those SOPs on how we operate as an organization to get us that output that we're actually looking for.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point too, is, we're doing it a very simple way. You could follow this exact protocol we're putting out today, and you could just say, hey, go into the CRM, export an Excel and throw it in the deal library, and the agent's ready to work. That's the most simple way you can build out your agents. There's a whole nother layer to this where you can actually connect your CRM to an agent and then have it further go into the CRM, find the data for you, and intelligently ask questions on everything. You don't need to export the data. You don't need to worry about data storage in a third party or in Microsoft. It just operates. Now, of course, there's general limitations. Some of the better CRMs are like Dynamics or HubSpot that have direct integrations, but there's plenty with APIs, and that's kind of where it gets into that level of complexity. So now that we have all of our data and we've decided this is what I want to create, let's actually start to create the data. So we're going to scroll down kind of far here. And I asked it, what do we actually need to make the agent work? And it outlined all of the files with a brief description of what they're going to be used for. This is a really important step in the agent creation. And the reason is when I'm looking at this from an executive standpoint, we know what our numbers are, how they operate, but we also know our KPIs, whether they're up here, they're on a document somewhere. Copilot has no clue, and it's not going to know where to surface because you as an executive probably have a lot more access than a general employee. So we have to put this in a place they have access to, and we need to make sure all the content's there. So it's going to make sure I have the brief, the revenue growth agent definition, the mock data sets for the pipeline, our data set variations. So this created different sheets in my document for me, as well as the prompts. We'll show you where these prompts are going to go inside of the agent. It also made sure to give us some different scenarios and potential slide deck speaker notes. It built off of the webinar. Now, when I had it make this content, we said, let's go one by one. This is something I recommend when you're using any AI, Copilot, Claude, ChatGPT, anything. When you have it outline something for you, the best way AI is going to work for you is say, okay, I have 10 items. I can't have it create all 10 items at once. It'll either do a poor job or it'll time out and then it'll get lost halfway through the work. So I always say, let's go one by one. Every time I'm done, I'll tell you, let's work on the next item. Until then, everything I say is going to be based on the item we're working on. So it works on the pipeline demo for me, and it creates a full Excel file for me. I can do this in Excel, or I can do it inside of Copilot Chat. What's really cool is I can actually type / and reference any of my files. So you can see here, I can pull the single table file and I can then have it remake it. I can have it read the entire Excel and I could say, I don't like how this is structured and I don't like how my numbers are formatted. Do X, Y, and Z, create a pivot table and a bar graph in a separate sheet and show me an analysis. And it's going to do it for me and give me a new file. So one of the things we were talking about as we were looking at today's webinar was that our Excel files generated during Copilot's little quest was it kind of separated all the data for us. And we wanted our revenue agent to be intelligent enough where we could just extract from the CRM all of our data, put it into the agent, and then have it make the decisions for us. What is at risk? What's stalled? What could be expanded upon? And those are all based on the KPI files. So we'll scroll down and we're just about at the end of this chat here and we'll hop into what those data files look like. I had it create everything. This was a really key file along with the KPIs. Determining what your output is going to look like is super important, whether it's what the end user is going to get back as Excel data, or if it's the general information the agent's going to respond with. You'll see today that we always have it start with an executive summary and then a very detailed breakdown of all of the deals. So there's no purpose in going back into the data files or the other third-party apps we have. It's right here in chat for an executive. Now, I just want to
I think that brings up a good point, though, Nick, is like,
yeah,
you want to trust the output, right? And I find myself sometimes even, like when I was really just getting started with some things and I was, okay, I would do this, I would like the way it looks, but then I would go spend all this time validating, right? Because I didn't really want to trust. And I think when you build this the right way, when you control what the output's going to look like, and you ground that agent, all of a sudden you're going to find that like you're going to get a reliable output that you don't have to go spend extra time validating.
exactly. That SOW agent we put together, the solutions engineering team, we spent, I think, 2 or 3 weeks just testing that over and over again before we even allowed it to publish content for us internally. And that took us either regrounding the templates it had or having it further understand how we quote things out internally. We had to make an entire library of all of our best SOWs in terms of, whether it was profitability, if it was structure, so that the engineering and service team succeeded. And then once it was trained on that content, we got reliable outcomes that we could just say, we trust it. But until that point, it took us a lot of testing and a lot of training. So I'm actually going to minimize my screen here, and we're going to look at some of the files. The first one's going to be the single table, which is all of our actual deals. So you'll see here, we have a lot of data. And this is to ideally be a mock of what you're pulling from your CRM or Salesforce, whichever tool you're utilizing.
Yeah,
We'll
look,
see that.
I know Copilot built this one, but
Right.
one thing I felt that was pretty interesting when we were looking at this together, Nick, is like this still looks like a pretty raw data export from what a CR, like if I export it from our CRM, what that would
Yeah.
actually look like. So
Yeah, Copilot is it's pretty incredible what it can create, and we wanted this to be as close as possible to what we're going to pull, because these are the things that matter in a deal. Obviously, you want to know the name, who's associated with it, but in general, some of these analytics are really important on the back end when you're making decisions in the long run. For example, in the future, you might be analyzing how many customers do we have between the 1 and 50 user mark, or how many of our deals are worth X amount over each month for us. And the agent's got to be able to understand this stuff. So some of these key indicators are really important to us, and you may or may not have these in your system already, but these are indicators like how long has the deal been in the pipeline, or how many days since the last activity on the said deal. A really big one for us is going to be these deal notes, because this is going to be something that everybody has. And a lot of times we'll find the documentation's not done, and that's something that has to be there for the revenue agent to make great decisions. You'll see we have things like it's waiting on approval, the CFO's not engaged, we have the interest is strong, but we need executive alignment, there is no buying process. and no meeting set. So these notes are going to help us determine where our deals are at during today's demo. The next one's going to be the analysis rules, which is extremely important for the agent to understand what matters to us. So you see,
So this
we
is
have
some of that like upfront legwork that we're talking about in terms of how we structure the agent, right? Or structure what we're
absolutely,
looking for now.
most definitely, this is something the executives would make decisions on and say, okay, categorically, this is what we're looking at from the top level. And when we're going into our data, this is what we need the agent to understand we're looking for. So it doesn't make its own decisions.
Got it.
So we'll have high risk pipeline, we'll have stalled expansion, and then of course healthy. So it's not like every single deal in your CRM is going to be one of the top three categories of high risk or stalled. There's going to be healthy deals. So we define that. We then have a rule column that says, okay, is it days in the pipeline we're going by? Is it the risk level that's put into the CRM? Or is it items in the notes that are going to indicate this is risky? Internally, I know
I think
here,
what's cool, real quick, Nick, though, too, like,
yeah,
is like maybe you aren't mature enough to have had these things defined, but we can leverage Copilot to help us define them for the sake of this, right? And to getting to a certain point.
I, I couldn't agree more. It's at different business sizes, you have different analytics you're looking at, and business is always changing, it's always growing. I know here internally we have a lot of these indicators. It's actually what helped make the demo. But in some instances, you just don't know how to look at this from a bird's eye view. And you can look online, you can have Copilot create this kind of thing. All of this data came from Copilot and what I have access to. And to be frank, I don't have access to all the executive stuff. So these are things that Copilot made for me, and I'm learning about myself. Um, when we look at this, we'll also have interpretation. This is huge. Along with creating a rule, I'm saying this is how you should then take the rule and interpret it for the deal. And when I get my data back, this is what I want it to be based off of. Another big thing that you might already be familiar with is keywords. When I see these items in the notes, this is what I want it to attach to. So the keyword library is primarily looking at expansion keywords for, if what do we need to figure out? If there's no decision maker, do we need to expand the deal? If there is a stall, why is it stalled? If it's unclear, we need to standardize. So we put together this library so that whenever Copilot agent sees these words, it knows what to do with them. The next big one, and then we're going to get right into the agent demo, is going to be our KPIs. This is important to us as an organization because depending on what industry you're in, you might have different profit margins you need to look at. You need to look at different deal values and how it affects your organizations. Every business's KPIs are going to be slightly different. And you don't want to just have Copilot based it on an industry norm that it can find online and say, oh, this probably fits the mold. Because then you're flying in the dark. You don't know what these KPIs are. And what could be even worse is that those KPIs could change. Maybe it's looking at a blog somewhere and somebody updates that blog. Now all your KPIs you're relying on are different. So we want to have this documented. Our KPI categories are things like efficiency, execution, discipline, and growth. We then have metrics broken down for each of these categories, like the average days, the next step, the win rate, the slippage rate, with the definition and a value that can be associated with these deals. So for instance, for growth, the average deal size we might be looking at is 95,000 and the target value is going to be 130,000. The business impact is we can increase revenue output by improving the deal quality and packaging. Copilot's going to look at it and say, well, this deal's 95,000 and you're looking at Microsoft 365 and you left Copilot out. If you included Copilot, you'll have another 45,000 in revenue you can include. And then the notes are what Copilot's going to look at to understand. How am I using this KPI to actually create your data? And then we've put in assumptions that help it understand what are we going to be analyzing? How many weeks are in our quarter? How many hours per week are we using for reviewing with the agent? And then our loaded hourly cost. That's a big one. When we take somebody like Ben and he's stuck in all these different files and systems for 4 or 5 hours, we're wasting salary, we're wasting executive time that could be used on more important things. And if he could just sit in an agent and do those 5 hours of work in 30 minutes, that's 4.5 hours. A useful resource can be back in deals, back working with the team and training, or making more revenue somewhere else on the table. So we want to look at this and say, how much time is being wasted in general so the agent can understand what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to close out of these Excels and
Now
I'm
I'm
going to
getting
start.
anxious. I'm getting anxious about building this agent now. So,
This is the fun part. This is where things start to break, and hopefully it breaks live so we can show you how to remediate some of these issues.
but I do want to, emphasize the importance of going through that process prior to going to build the agent. Right? I think that's a lot of some of the steps that people are skipping today. Right? And while we're not trusting some of these things, we're not necessarily getting the outputs that we're looking for. So I'm glad we spent some time on that today, because I think the more we can ground these agents in what we're actually looking to accomplish, the better the outcomes are going to be.
Yeah, it is super important, whether it's for today's call, for example, building the webinar in a way that it'll work live, or just in general, making sure that when other people touch the AI and in yourself is working in it, there's action that's going to work for your organization versus, oh, I'm going to try chat today and just see if it works. We spent a lot of time crafting this so that way it was the same thing with the SOW agent. I sat in Copilot, I was doing trainings and certification paths to try and figure out, what is going to make this work in the proper way, whether it's the actions order it's going to take, or, for example, the deal library. What's the perfect way for it to use our data? Um, when we create a new agent, the biggest thing I want to highlight is that this is a chat agent. It is not a Copilot Studio agent, which means it's going to run off of your Copilot for Business license, and it's going to operate similar to a normal chat. Copilot Studio is a much more in-depth developer tool where you can bring in a lot more third-party data, whether it's APIs or connectors. You can have custom workflows, and a big one is you can have orchestration. So we could create 6 or 7 different agents. I could have the SOW agent, the revenue agent. I could even tie in some Microsoft agents. And when I make a Copilot Studio agent, I can then have it use all of those agents I just listed to orchestrate an answer for me. And those other agents will work in tandem. So I'll ask it something with a prompt. It'll say, let me ask my 5 other guys. Those other guys are going to do all their work, report back to the studio agent, and then give me an output. This
I put you on the
internal.
spot on this one, Nick, but out
Sure.
of curiosity, does Microsoft have any out of the box agents that you can grab and deploy, or
Oh,
does
yeah,
everything have to be custom built?
most definitely. I think the biggest one that has recently come out, and it's what's allowing companies to move away from the Claude app but still use the models, is Copilot Cowork. That's something right now that's just become generally available for organizations, and that leverages Opus and some of the other models that are coming out. I'd imagine Fable 5 and Mythos will not be rolled out into that agent, but it's utilizing the same thing Claudes are. So you're getting the same results. And if you ever want to save yourself time, there's a ton of agents under this more agents option here that you can see you can start to install. And immediately it's going to be pre-grounded to do a workload. And you'll see as we put those grounding scripts in, there's a lot to think about. It tends to be the bulk of the workload when it comes to agent creation. So researcher, I know, is a very big one that's highly grounded for research purposes. This is an agent. All I have to do is click on, and it's going to explain to me what this agent does. And then I can click open and it'll install it. As you build agents for your organization and you share them out to users, agents will be discoverable here for employees. You can actually see that the ITC SOW agent's been shared to me. So if for any reason it wasn't added to Copilot, maybe I get a new login or we get a new user, they can come here and just opt into the agent that I've built for the company. Co-work sits up here in the top left, so I can switch over here, and now I'm in the co-work environment. I think it's really important just to mention that co-work is very different than the normal Copilot agent we're going to build, where it's similar to Studio. This runs on a pay-as-you-go model. So the Copilot agent we build today is license-based. You pay the $36 a month, that covers your agent. Pay-as-you-go means as you chat, as it analyzes data and utilizes other agents, there's a cost that accrues throughout the month that Microsoft will bill you for. You'll see here, I don't currently have access, so I can request it, and that'll go to an admin. And then once it's enabled, I can start to use the Claude large language models.
It's because we don't trust you to not go.
That's okay. I might blow things up.
Get a bunch of chargers, right? So
exactly.
No, look, I appreciate you taking some time to kind of map that out, because I think there are some out of the box ones that, off the shelf ones that you can deploy pretty quickly that will help with some of those more trivial tasks throughout the day. Still save you some time.
Right.
But I wanted to make sure we touched on that, and it showed the availability of those. But I think as you're problem solving something that's very specific, this is where I think it's worth the time and energy into building, that individual agent for your use case.
Yeah, I think it tends to be the biggest confusion when it comes to the general agent conversation. When we look at the Microsoft agents that they have in the store, they're very basic business functions. For example, researcher, that's a small business function that somebody's going to constantly use, maybe on the sales side. Teach me about this business. It's going to look up their LinkedIn, their blog, their website, and pull all that info. But for example, we saw nothing about revenue, sales, anything like that in the agent store. It's very specific to the company. So up on our screen, you're going to see, similar to what I did in my chat earlier in today's webinar, it's going to ask me what I want to do. And I could sit here and create a large prompt and have it start to build out a lot of what we were chatting about. The difference is it's not going to create me my files, my deal library, and it might have less intelligence than the general chat I was asking. So in the top left, right, I'm going to hit skip. You'll notice I still have my agentic builder over here where I can ask questions and I can use files. But I'm actually going to do a new agent from scratch. So we're going to give this a name. And just so I know it different from my other one, I'm going to call it Webinar Revenue Agent. If I want to, I can give it a custom icon and I can give it a description so employees know the purpose of this agent. Utilize this agent when analyzing business revenue data. Now, this is the bulk of the work. So we're going to give it instructions today. And I already have a document open to make this a little bit faster. And I'm going to copy and paste this line by line so I can explain to you the purpose of this grounding script. It is extremely, extremely important to include a lot of this information. The first line is context. What is the agent doing and who is the agent? This is why we joke that agents are kind of like employees. I want to give it a persona. So whenever I ask it a question, the first thing the agent does is say, who am I today? What am I going to act as? In some cases, you'll see people build a series of agents for their entire C-suite. They make a fake CFO, CXO, COO, CIO, and then that agent is always answering questions in that persona. So we're going to say you're a revenue growth agent, and you're going to analyze pipeline data and give us executive level revenue insights. That's going to play into the outputs it gives us throughout today's call, where I ask it a question about my pipeline, and then it already understands, okay, this is what I'm supposed to answer. The next one is going to be our data sources. You do not need to do this every time. As you can see down below, I can give it a set of knowledge, but the reason we've done this today is I want in the grounding, every time somebody asks this chatbot a question, I want it to look over these files first before anything else. The one
So those
file,
are just basically all those tables that we talked about earlier, right? All those
exactly.
documents, okay, referencing those grounding rules that we put in place.
Right. And then we have a brief description of them that we've created, which Copilot gave us, so we can understand. The only file that we absolutely don't need is that primary demo file of the pipeline, because ideally in the future, when we're utilizing this, we're either just dumping in more Excels into the knowledge base, or we're updating a single file, in which case this will be useful. But I'm also telling it what the file is so it knows how to identify it. That way, whenever we're talking about it, if something in the file changes, columns, column data, it knows, okay, analysis rules is our classification logic and decision making. Our deal notes library is qualitative context and deal insights. We then have the agent output templates. That's going to be the structure it answers my questions in. And then the KPI assumptions is the business impact and KPI context. Now I'm going to give it responsibilities, which is going to be important for how it understands everything. So I'm going to go bullet by bullet because there's actually quite a lot in here we need to place. I'm going to hit enter and we're going to paste this in. So responsibilities is the order of operations that the agent's going to go through before giving me an output. So first things first, I always want it to look through every deal. An ongoing challenge that organizations face is you give Copilot data and it truncates it, meaning it only looks through a subset of the data and then starts to make decisions. So I want to tell it, first of all, analyze all the deals and then use the analysis rules file to classify our deals. This is how I come to my high risk, my stalled, my expansion, and my healthy pipeline. If I didn't have this in an Excel file already, this would suffice as a way for us to say, this is how we're going to classify everything. But by doubling up on one, the Excel data in our deal notes, and two, inside of our prompt, it knows for a fact what our deals mean to us and how we want them segmented.
It's kind of similar to how you're talking about earlier, like even just in a normal chat prompt where you're like the one by one, right? So,
Exactly.
right, like we want to set it up in a way where it goes this first, this second, this third.
Right. That's exactly right. And it's in general, we want to limit what the end user has to put in. So, one sales representative might have this aced and they might be able to prompt that. But then the rest of our sales team might have no clue how to actually analyze this data. And it starts to kind of create issues in terms of the responses everybody's getting. Because this is getting so big, I'm going to pop the instructions out for us. So what I've added in is interpret notes for keyword logic. This is sentiment based. So when somebody looks at the notes, what are negative and what are positive indicators? And then of course, what are the expansion items that we want to look at? So that way my sales team can just intelligently put in whatever happened on a call or during a deal. Copilot can then interpret it, and I know as a revenue leader, this is what it's looking at. It's going to use our deal notes library to enhance its reasoning and recommendations. It's going to generate outputs strictly following our template. This is something where if you spend a lot of time templatizing stuff like our SOW agent, it's a key to have. And then we want to tie all our insights and recommendations to the business impact and revenue KPIs. And then run a little short on time. So I'm going to copy all this stuff in really quick. And then we'll be ready to put in the last info. So prioritization rules is how it's going to look at my deals and how I might want to understand them as an executive, high risk being the first and foremost, stalled and then into expansion. I want my outputs to be concise and executive ready based on revenue impact, actionability, decision clarity, and I do not want it to speculate on outside data. That is a key because when you enable the web, which I'll show you in a second, it can start to speculate and you enter into the realm of AI hallucinations. And then its general goal. What is it trying to actually do for me? I've given it a whole lot of, hey, do this and always do it this way, but I haven't told it what is the expected outcome. So I want it to accelerate revenue, reduce risk, prioritize focus, and improve pipeline health. So now that it has all its instructions, I'm going to say, where do I want it to actually look? and I'm going to attach a OneDrive cloud file. This will open up my OneDrive, and I'll go to my files, and I'll select the entire folder. And this is going to make it so it only looks into my folder. It's not going to look into SharePoint. It's not going to look into email and Teams. And if I want it to, I can include that. But by default, it's just going to look at this OneDrive folder. You can search all websites and enable web content, or you can use only the specified resources, which typically is a better option when you're using agents to reduce any kind of static that might come in through your prompts. Capabilities are really important, and you got to think of these ahead of time. You can always enable them in the future, but you don't want to limit your team. I know personally, I don't want any images right now. I want everything to be in a PowerPoint, a Word document, or an Excel. Maybe in the future, I want it to create images. Maybe it's going to make me a bar graph visual or something along the lines, and I can ask it to do that later. Now we get into arming our employees with work. So I'm going to say, first, I want my title to be explain the current pipeline. And this is going to be how the prompts actually show up to the users. And then I'm going to say, look through my current pipeline scenarios and break down the scenario by what is in each pipeline. I'm going to give it a what deals are high risk, because this is going to be something that the executives ideally ask regularly. And the prompt is going to be which deals in my pipeline are currently marked as high risk and explain why they're high risk. And then the last one I'm going to give it is how can I increase my revenue? So utilize our KPIs and look at my current pipeline and tell me how I can increase the revenue. These are the 3 prompts that show up by default. So when somebody opens the agent, they click the button and it starts the analysis. Now we're going to hit create, and it's going to give us the ability to start to preview this. So I can go to the agent. We're going to actually close that really quick, and we're going to click preview. And this is now what my agent looks like. I have my 3 prompts we just created. And in general, if I just want to start asking questions, I can. But let's start with what deals are high risk. Now, hopefully this breaks and I can show you how to fix it. But that's the purpose of preview, is that preview is going to show you where it fails and what your outcomes are before you publish this to other users. When you make changes in your agent, you can think about there's 2 layers. There's essentially the sandbox where I'm playing around, I'm previewing the agent. And then when I hit update, we're in production. Everybody using the agent or everybody that has access to the agent is going to get my changes. Now, this is the first time the agents run. So surprisingly, it was able to create this in just a few short seconds. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time, but in general, it can be pretty fast as it gets trained. So our executive summary has already come in, and it's talking what are the drivers. So I can understand, maybe I don't know who built the agent. I just know somebody in my company put this together and somebody gave them the KPIs. So our decisions are made on the agent pipeline, no decision maker, no clear steps, or negative sentiment. And then these factors are directly impacted by the KPIs we created: increased slippage rate, lower win rate, and a reduced pipeline velocity. Here's where it gets really impactful. We have a way to identify which deals are actually at risk and why. Apex Manufacturing, CFO is not engaged and the proposal is aging. It's going to hit expiration soon. We then have our risk drivers. Also, we have Nova Health, Velocity Transport, and Aster Tech. Then it breaks down by KPI which deals are at risk for which reason. So no decision maker, it's Evergreen, it's Mariner, and it's Northgate. No next step is Titan, Pinecrest, and the other deals. We have our aging deals with declining engagement, and then our competitive pricing and pressure deals. Now here's our takeaways. This is every risk across our pipeline: decision gaps, execution gaps, momentum decay, external pressure, and what it means to our revenue. Based on our file, there's about $5 million in the pipeline. So if we have this deal slippage, we're looking for a target reduction between 40 and 20% revenue. Our lower win rates have a baseline of 25%. That's not good. We want our win rate at very least at 50%. And then we have an extended sales cycle duration, which is reducing our throughput. We're getting less deals coming in, or we're getting less deals to close. Now, from here, I can start to say, all right, well, let's do this. Explain the top 5 high risk deals by revenue, why they are at risk, and how I can resolve the risk issues. And it's still going to take into account everything I've created in our initial grounding. So it's going to look to give me that executive summary and that high level breakdown of all of the deals. So it's not going to stray away and start to say, oh, well, I can just give you a 5-word sentence that says, your deals are at risk. Now it's going to take a second to think about it. And it's going to say, all right, here's the deals by their value. Granite Manufacturing is our biggest deal at 310,000, and it's at risk because the decision maker is not engaged, and there's been some strong negative signals. We have pricing sensitivity, so we might have outpriced them in general. We have a competitor evaluation, so we now need to think there's other fishes in the pond. Maybe we need to change our pricing or inclusions to bring this back to green. And then we've also had procurement pushback. So maybe we need to look into the meeting notes. Is it our procurement team that's saying, hey, we can't get better pricing? Is it something on their end where we just can't lock in the deal? And what does this mean? We have our largest deal in our high risk segment has the highest potential for revenue loss, and our active competitor and pricing pressure means it's low win. We might not win this deal at all. And as an executive, I have to say, do I step in? Do I help the sales rep? Or do I have the sales rep back off and we start looking for other deals? A deal of that value, we're probably getting engaged. And then we
Real
can.
quick, Nick, I know that when we were building the agent on this one, we included the data set there, right?
Right.
That we're going to be referencing. But let's say I'm coming into this 3 days later and I have a different data set, right? That I've just exported from the CRM. Am I going to upload it directly into the agent here, or do I have to go on the back end like we did when we were building the agent?
So we do it from the back end. With what we created in this file library here, I can either just drop in a file and I could
Got
say,
it.
look at
So
forward
that
slash.
folder that you had put in there, right? Now, if I go put a new document into that folder, I can just reference that new document here.
Exactly. Now, since we're in preview, it's going to give me a hard time and it's not going to let me pull things up. But when you do forward slash, it's going to allow you to reference other files. So you have two options.
Gotcha.
We have two options. We can ground the agent to say, look at the file with the most recent date. Maybe every file is current pipeline, 6.2427. Look at the most recent date file and base my information off of that. And then when it does this analysis, it'll go off the most recent. The other option is a central database. So it could be a SharePoint list. It could just be one big Excel. It could be Dataverse. And once you upload the new data, it'll then start to input all the new information when you prompt the agent.
Gotcha. Appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely. I know I ran us right up to time with the agent creation.
Okay. I know we probably could have taken 2 hours to do this one.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to go over. As you can see, building the actual agent, a lot of it is background work, and then getting the agent to work takes minimal time. From there, it's troubleshooting, improving the grounding, maybe even improving your templated files you have in your deal library. But it's something we can help you with. We've been working on agents internally for a little while now, and our customers are starting to expand in the agentic world. As you can see, there is by far no shortage of what the tools can do. Is it a good time to open up to questions, Ben?
Yeah, look, we got a couple minutes here, right? So if anybody has any questions, let's post them in the chat. And while we're waiting for any of those questions to come in, definitely want everybody to know, everybody in attendance today, or that signed up, even if they couldn't make it today, right? We'll get an email. If you guys have any inquiries, want to schedule that first round of consultation on any of the things that we talked about today, right? You're just curious, wanting to learn more and trying to figure out where to start. Let the team help. Right? We've got a lot of people working on these things today. Maybe you want to talk about the governance aspects or the compliance aspects and the security procedures that we need to have in place to move forward. But maybe you're ready, right? And like you want to start deploying some agents and want to start doing some things a little differently. But we're happy to help. So
And I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A or the chat.
that's because you answered all the questions today, Nick. You did good.
Hopefully it's that, or we really fried the brain with AI today.
Yeah. Well, look, I appreciate everybody joining today. Well, gosh,
Ooh.
how would you know what you want your agent to do is too general? It's a good question.
That is a really good question. One of the things I use to identify if it's too general is as we went through earlier on that general agent store, is what are the current agents that Microsoft's pushing out? And is it something where the prompt is very simple? Same with the output. So if, for example, I wanted to say, I just want it to look at a file and give me a bunch of information on the data. Maybe I wanted to do /pipeline. Tell me about my deals in this file. For the basics, chat can handle a lot of stuff in terms of whether it's data analysis, data creation. But when my prompts have to start getting really, really lengthy, hey, I want you to look at this file. I want to think about these KPIs. I also want you to templatize it this way and answer my questions only like this. That's when we start to bridge the gap of this is too general to this actually requires an agent. With the SOWs, it was actually really easy for us to just give Copilot notes, customer name, deal size, general outline, create me an SOW. But
I
where it
also like
became,
to think, Nick, too, if like multiple people are going to be using the agent, right? You want that standardization across
right,
every user that's going to be prompted, right? So that's when I
yeah,
think like, hey, like that's what we got to take a step back and make sure that we are clear and concise and what that output's going to look like, and then it's not too different.
most definitely. With the Copilot chat, you could give it the same prompt 5 different times across 5 employees. Everybody's going to get a different answer and a different output. Whereas an agent, and it's grounded, pretty much no matter what you prompt, you'll get a pre-built answer for you in the way you expect. I think that's probably the biggest problem, Josh, that a lot of organizations are facing is I want an agent, but is this too general? I'd say those are our determining factors.
That's a good question. Well, look, we'll wrap up. Appreciate everybody joining today. If you got any questions, just want to chat some more, Nick and I would be happy to jump on a call. So have a great day. Again, appreciate everybody joining. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.